G'day guys, Brendan here from On Point Adventures. Today I'm giving you my 5 best boat buying tips to ensure you get a boat that suits your needs better. Now, why am I a credible source for this? In my time of 20 years buying and selling boats, I've owned a lot and I've made a lot of mistakes. So it's far easier that you learn from mine rather than make your own. Second of all, I spent a couple of years selling boats for one of Perth's largest and most reputable boatyards. In that time, I spoke to a lot of clients. I sold a lot of clients' boats. They all came back to me and said, thank you, because we found the boat that suited them best. And I could only work with them by asking them the most relevant questions to ensure they had the best outcome. So in this video, I'm going to teach you the questions you need to ask, what you need to look for, and above all else, what you should be paying to ensure you get the best possible deal. Right, enough talking. Let's get into it. Now, before you even get started on making a budget or anything like that, you first need to understand exactly what type of boat you're looking for. Now, I know this sounds stupid, but a lot of the times emotion does get in the way of a better decision. Now, so what you need to do, you need to sit down and almost brainstorm by yourself or with the family, if it's going to be a family boat, of exactly what you want to do. Now, I'm going to use the Polycraft as an example for me and why I chose the Polycraft. I had to sit down and think, what are my main fishing types going to be? Where am I going to use it the most? And primarily, what am I going to be doing with it? Now, there's a lot of other boats on the market that could do specific types of fishing a lot better than the blue Polycraft. And boy, that sun is absolutely hooking. But what I exactly had to do was sit down and go, okay, primarily, my main type of fishing is going to be this. Now, I primarily launch off a beach for argument's sake. So massive boats like the Centurion or bigger was out of the question for me because a lot of the time I'm solo. So of course I needed a boat smaller, this is 4.1 meters, that is going to be easy to beach launch and do a great job at it. Okay, I'm also not going to be just in the ocean. For maybe 10-15% of my time, I'm going to be up rivers and estuaries. Now, that didn't grant a full-on river boat, but it needed a boat that was slightly more versatile than a deep V-style dinghy or so forth. I'm usually going to be solo, and I'm usually throwing soft plastics, which means I've got to move around a boat a lot. So I needed stability. I don't usually go too quick because in a smaller boat, you get very wet if you go very fast. So I didn't need ridiculously high horsepower or something that's going to cut through water immaculately, because I'm simply not going to be out on days like this where it's absolutely rank. So that's why I came up with the 410 Challenger. So how does that combat everything I wanted? It's got a shallow draw for in the river. It's a light enough boat, being 4.1 meters, that it essentially can be launched off beaches solo really well. Because of that shallow draw, the stability is absolutely monstrous. We went a modest sized motor, 40 horsepower. So 40 horsepower is still going to be able to pull me out of the trouble if I get caught up in a bit of swell. We've got lower sides, so it's not going to catch the wind so much when I'm brim fishing, as well as we've got the electric motor up the front there. We've got the center console, which when you're a single person navigator trying to see things is good to be able to stand up because you don't have a spotter. And all in all, that's why I chose the 4.1 Challenger. Now keep in mind, guys, I did cheat a bit as well because I've owned a 4.1, so I know what they're like, and they have been the most flawless boat I've owned. They're faultless for what I do. So that is why I went the 4.1. So by slowing down and thinking of exactly what you're going to require your boat for and laying it all out on the table is going to enable you to find the right type of hull. There's number 1. Let's get on to number 2. Number 2, brands. Now, whilst brands some people think aren't so important, I actually think they're ridiculously important. Why they're ridiculously important is different brands have different manufacturing processes, and different manufacturing processes have different build qualities. So for argument's sake, you should be working out where the brand is made, how it's constructed, and so forth. And also consider the reputation of the brand, okay? Now, of course, there's some brands which are very new on the market, and yeah, you might be, I guess, somewhat intrigued to give them a go. But a brand that's been around for a long period of time generally means that you're gonna get a lot more trustworthy and a lot more boat for your buck. Something you can, as I said, you can trust. So what I'd be doing is I'd be jumping online using Google, using Facebook, using all social media to have a good look at the brands. Now, I'm not necessarily saying check out all the reviews and so forth, because a lot of reviews are very emotionally based. I've seen some cracking boats get some absolute terrible reviews based on someone perhaps not even liking the owner, for argument's sake, something really petty. So therefore they take it out on the brand to try and bring the brand down as much as possible. But brands like Coraline, Genesis, Razorline, Polycraft, probably not some of the bigger pressed aluminium names anymore, but you could look at like your Stessels and so forth, are brands that I think you can put a lot of trust in, where some others have actually sent a lot of their processing offshore, and I think that's something you need to keep in mind as well, because I personally do not believe that offshore manufacturing has as much skill, care and technique as what our Aussie manufacturers do. I guess you'd say keep it local. Let's get on to number 3. Now, you've decided your brand and you've decided your budget. And I think this one here is one of the biggest things you need to work out. Are you going to be buying privately, or are you going to be using a dealer? Now, both are going to have massive pros and cons, and I'll run you through a couple of them. On the private side, you're generally going to pick up a boat that's fractionally cheaper. You're going to get probably a little more bang for your buck, but you do take massive risks into your own hands. Now, also just quickly before we go into those risks, you also get to gauge the owner, you get to work out who they are as a person, and you can generally tell from a general conversation on how that person would have treated their gear and whether or not they really hammered it, or treated it roughly, or they treated it really well. But the dangers of buying private is a lot of the time a private seller is not going to be completely honest. There's always going to be little things that they're probably not going to tell you in order just to get that little bit extra for their boat. For argument's sake, I bought a Quintrex not too long ago, maybe 3 years ago. The gentleman told me it was absolutely ship shape. It looked good, it looked great. What he didn't tell me was that he'd strategically placed a roller underneath the boat right on top of a pinhole, and it leaked like a sieve. He didn't tell me that a lot of the work on the Johnson that it apparently had, it didn't have. And that boat was an absolute lemon. It cost me a lot of money to fix it, to weld it and so forth and get it up. But essentially, once you buy private and you drive that out of their driveway, the gloves are off, there's no warranty, there's nothing you can do about it, you just get used to it. They're the dangers of buying private. The positives of buying through a dealer. The dealer has to generally be pretty bloody honest, because it's his reputation. And in a day of social media where you can get one negative review which can ruin everything you've ever worked for, it's very dangerous for a dealer to spread bulldust about the boat that he's trying to sell you. It's in his best interest to send you away with the best possible information he can, so then you spruik about how good he was, how well he's done, and then your mates hopefully come and buy a boat off him as well, because that's the main objective, is creating a bit of a CRM, working on rapport and making more money. Now, the other good thing with a dealer is it's not in their best interest to sell you junk, because if they sell you junk, it comes back to them, because you do have, with a lot of boatyards, you do have a grace period. So keep that in mind, and it's always good to ask the dealer, I guess, what that grace period is. But the cons of buying through a dealer is this: you generally pay more. You pay more because you're paying for a salesman to sell you a boat. Now, the reason you're paying for that salesman to sell you a boat is for all those good reasons I've just let you know, but he also does need to earn a crust. A lot of people will say, oh, but dealers are ripping me off, but what you got to realise is the dealer's overheads, you know, you've got premise, you've got electricity, you've got all amenities, you've got wages, you've got this, you've got that. You've even got down to the workshop generally will run up a boat and completely make sure that boat is squeaky sound before it releases to you as a client. Positive for you, but it does reflect in the price because they have to weigh that in. Those sort of services are not free. But what it comes down to again is that peace of mind that you get buying a boat from a dealer knowing that it has run through those workshops. Now, not all dealers are going to be awesome, but what I'd suggest is in your local area, wherever you may be, look at the longevity of how long that boatyard has been running. I mean, we've got a couple of boatyards here in Perth, Western Australia. I use Boat City as a good example. I know Boat City very well. A lot of you who know me know why I know Boat City. However, that boatyard has been running and is probably the longest standing Northern River dealership in Western Australia. Now that tells you that obviously something they're doing right, and that's because if they weren't doing it right, that boatyard would have closed down like the many others that have closed down north of the river that said they were going to come and change the world, and they haven't. South of the river, look at, south of Perth River, look at guys like Chivers Marine. Those guys are obviously doing something right because they are huge and they've been around forever. So yes, look into private or dealership, and if you're looking into one or the other, maybe just do a bit of online research, especially on the dealerships, to see how long they've been around. And of course, they can't have been around forever if they were doing something wrong. Right, let's get on to number 4. Okay, the ins and outs of the boat. And this one's my favorite because by now you've established the type of boat you want, the budget you're going to work towards, private or dealer, and so forth. And you've now got a game plan. You've most likely now looked online, you've found the boats and you're going to go check them out. But this not only is the most exciting part, this is the most dangerous part. Human nature says that when we go and look at something, we're pretty excited, which means we're slightly jaded into what we could potentially be looking past. And what I mean by that is, when you've got a lot of excitement, or in my case, get your little dopamine hits, you sometimes get that excited that you overlook blemishes that you possibly shouldn't. So for this reason, if you're a bit excited like I am and a bit spontaneous, take a friend with you who's brutally honest, because this is going to work really well for the last point I'm going to make as well. Now, what you want to do when you get there, you want to go through the ins and outs of the duck's ass, as they say. Okay, if you're beach launching, you want to make sure that everything's set up for beach launching and it's going to do exactly what you do, because remember, what you miss right now is going to cost you money later on, and that might be money you don't have. So start with one end and work to the other. Have a game plan if it's by yourself or with your mate, and don't deviate. So let's say we start at the outboard. Pop the cowling, have a look underneath the cowling and look at the general condition. Look at, maybe even crack the gearbox oil and make sure the oil's not milky. If it's a 4-stroke, check the oil. Make sure you start that outboard and make sure the telltale is going crazy. And here's my biggest tip, which a lot of sellers are going to hate me for telling. Make sure the motor's cold when you get there, because a lot of motors, when they're cold, are a bit more piggish to start than when they're warm. Generally, once a motor's warm, it starts nicer, it does a lot more good things, whereas a cold motor can obviously sometimes reveal a lot of hidden problems. Make sure you run that motor for a fair amount of time too. Don't just turn it on, oh yeah, she's beautiful, and turn it off. Just let it idle there while you go for a walk around the boat, but keep your ears peeled for that slight sound of miss or whatever. Because remember guys, if you've got to fix a motor or you've got to replace a motor, that's going to cost you a lot, and that needs to be factored into your overall budget. From there, move on to stuff like your electronics and whatnot. With electronics, you want to turn everything on and off. You want to make sure that everything's working, and this is where a friend can really help you. While you're flicking something on and off, he can be checking whether it's working, be it your navigation lights or whatever. This is important because, once again, electrical work on boats is not cheap and is generally one of the first things to stuff up on a boat, because salt and electrics don't generally mix. Make sure you go through everything inside the boat. Check in the hatches, look for spots of corrosion, check the hull, get underneath the hull. I got caught out, as I've said earlier on in this video. This is why I'm so passionate about this, and just check everything from start to finish. Be meticulous. Don't look at a boat and expect to be in and out in 5 minutes unless it's an absolute hunk of shit. Prepare to be there for an hour if you think it's a boat that really is looking good. Next, kick the tires, rock the bearings, make sure they're good. Jump underneath the trailer and check for any rust on the main chassis beams of the trailer, because if you've got to replace a trailer, there's another hidden cost. And what I'm trying to get at with this bit is, by going through meticulously and really making sure you check absolutely everything, it's going to save you money in the long run, because if you miss it, you're going to pay for it. And trust me, nothing boating is cheap. That's just common knowledge. If you think perhaps that you may miss one or two things, write a checklist. I do this now. I write a checklist now because I want to ensure that through my excitement, I don't miss anything. Once you've gone through your checklist, you weigh up all your pros, you weigh up all your cons of what the boat is doing right and isn't doing right, and then you can make a more educated decision on what your final piece of the puzzle may be. Now, let's get on to number 5, because number 4 is very, very relevant. Let's go. So the final piece of any boat purchasing expedition is the purchase. What are you going to pay for the boat? Now, don't ever think you're going to go into a boat and you're going to pay full price for it, because that's simply not going to happen. What you're going to do is you're going to use all those cons that you found with the boat to negotiate with the buyer as to why you think potentially the price may need to be changed. Now, there are a lot of boats that I've bought where I've paid full asking price, and I've been happy with that because the asking price was completely reasonable and went really, really well. But there's also been a lot of times where the asking price has been completely wrong, and therefore I've had to negotiate. So for argument's sake, if you can see that a lot of the electronics aren't working, then you've got to use that in your negotiation for the final price. Keep in mind, generally a private seller is going to be a lot more negotiable than what a dealer is going to be. That's because the dealer knows that his product is good. The private seller sometimes is trying to hide something. Not all the time. I've met plenty of good private sellers, and this isn't a beatdown on a private selling group either. As I said, by working out what is right and what is wrong about the boat, as we've said in number 4, is going to dictate on how negotiable you think the price should be. Guys, there's been plenty of times where I've rocked up to a boat and they've been asking $15,000 for, by the time I've worked it out and I've discussed it with them, I've walked away with boats for under $9,000 with a $15,000 asking price, because the seller has realised that potentially A, they're going to be stuck with the problem if I don't take it, or B, they may not have even known the problem was there. And that's a big thing. The seller doesn't always know the problem's there. It's up to you to find it. It's not their duty to find it for you. And therefore, they've been very negotiable. Keep in mind through the negotiation as well, if you go in there and you want to go in there guns blazing, beating your chest like Tarzan, you're probably going to get a seller offside, and they're going to tell you to get the stuff out of their driveway, and they don't ever want to see you again. And that's not advantageous. If you go in there arrogant, you're not going to be able to negotiate. No one wants to negotiate with an arrogant individual. By going in there with a really, really good attitude, be polite, be enthusiastic to a point, but above all else, be amicable about the whole situation, you'll generally find that a seller will want to work with you a lot better than if you've gone in there like a complete asshole. Anyway, guys, these 5 boat buying tips is something that I've worked out in my many, many boats I've owned, and trust me, I've owned a ton of boats, and I've found that it's worked for me. Now, I encourage you to probably listen. It's up to you if you do or don't, but most importantly, down in the comments below, I want to hear about your boat buying experiences. Right, guys, we'll talk to you on the next episode. Catch you later.